Okay, so today we're going to talk about the cell membrane, something that you've already discussed, but we're going to review it going into a little bit more detail than we went in before. So let's review. There are three functions that you need to be aware of for the cell membrane. One is the cell membrane regulates what enters and what leaves the cell. It also provides protection and support for the cell, and it communicates with other cells. But what we're going to be focusing on in class is this part right here, what regulates, and it's going to regulate what enters and what leaves. But you should know that the cell membrane acts as a barrier separating the cell's insides from its outsides. The cell membrane is also known as the plasma membrane, and it's often referred to as a semi-permeable membrane. So don't be shocked if you hear the words cell membrane and plasma membrane used interchangeably. Cell membrane refers to the tendency for the cell to allow some materials in, but not all. So think about using a screen or a net, or even using a strainer after you've made spaghetti or macaroni or something like that. You are going to allow something to pass through, but not everything, so that you can catch what you need. The cell membrane is made out of a structure called a phospholipid bilayer, and bilayer just simply means double layer. So this is one layer and this is the other layer. What exactly is a phospholipid? This, of course, is review because we talked about phospholipids when we talked about lipids and macromolecules, but you should know that a phospholipid is a lipid and it just has a phosphate group on top. Okay, so there's your phosphate. There is a polar group attached to the phosphate. Polar means it's attracted to water. Nonpolar means it's repelled by water. So the top of this phospholipid is attracted and the bottom is repelled. So we have a phospholipid head and tail. The hydrophilic head loves water, so the head loves water and the tails hate water. Question for you, what surrounds each side of the cell membrane? If you thought water-based fluids, basically water cytoplasm, you are correct. Okay, so the water-loving heads are going to face the water. So we have water on this side, and we have water on this side. The water-hating tails are going to hide from the water, and that's where all of this is. This keeps the integrity of the cell membrane glued together. Small molecules will be able to diffuse through, and that includes water because water is so small it doesn't recognize it. Bigger molecules unfortunately need proteins to get in and out of the cell, and this blue object right there is a protein, that is a protein, and that right there is a protein. The fluid mosaic model was proposed by S.J. Singer, and a mosaic is a work of art made by different colored or textured tiles that are assembled to form a picture or design. Okay, the term fluid mosaic model is just a model used to describe the structure of the cell membrane, and they choose that because there's so many different molecules attached to the membrane, it almost looks like a mosaic because you have this one, you have that molecule, you have this molecule here, you have this molecule here, you got this one. You can't forget the lipid bilayer itself, it's just everywhere. Okay, so proteins in the plasma membrane that you need to know of, there are three of them. They are embedded into the plasma membrane and they are important for cell function. One would be transport, the other is a marker protein, and the final one is a receptor protein. Transport proteins are responsible for moving materials in and out of the cell, but what you should know is that they are involved in passive and they can be involved in active transport as well. And we'll determine what that means later. All right, so let's talk about the type of transport proteins we have. One is a channel protein, and those are small openings in the cell membranes. They're used for ions or polar molecules, and they take place during passive transport. So that right there is a channel protein. The second kind we have is a gated channel protein, and a gated channel protein is going to have a gap or it's going to flap open and close in order to let certain substances in or out. And then last but not least, we have a carrier protein. And carrier proteins transport proteins that can move substances, and they have to change their shape to do so. Okay, so we have a substance that will come in this way, and then for it to leave, it has to change its shape. And this can happen in both passive and in active transport. When it happens in passive transport, it's called facilitated diffusion, and we'll talk about it when it happens shortly. So what is a marker protein? Well, it's just exactly what it sounds like. It's basically a name tag, and it's going to be used to identify the cell. They are often labeled as glycoproteins because the marker protein itself is going to contain a carbohydrate. So glyco, generally we associate that with sugar. One of the functions of marker proteins is to enable a person's immune system to distinguish its cells from those of invading cells. Okay, receptor proteins allow the cell to interact and communicate with the other cells, and they do that by picking up signals from other cells. The part of the receptor protein on the exterior of the cell surface binds to a molecule. This causes the portion of the protein on the inside of the cell to change shape, and that's going to trigger a reaction within the cell, and then we get a signal. So if you look right here, we have receptor proteins. Here is our receptor. Okay, and here's our ligand, which is a primary messenger, and it's going to come in, and then the secondary messengers do their thing, and we get a response. And then something happens in the nucleus because of the receptor protein delivering the message.